box. Project management has steps. We establish the context, which means that we understand the project, we develop a team, we identify the framework we're going to work under. Then we start planning. We plan scope first, then schedule, then resources, then we risk manage, and we finalize the plan. We get it approved. That yellow diamond is project portfolio management. At this point, we stop. We get permission from them to spend money to build, because we've proven to them that what they wanted is what they can get. And then you go through this process to build it and close it out.
Okay.
Those are the steps of project management.
So in 1.2 and 2.2, you're basically doing the first triangle over there,
And see, that's where I've got to disavow that out of your head.
Oh, okay.
There is not a connection between this and that. Because where you see up there where I put the triangle over investigate, in that triangle, you will do all of these steps. To do that project, you will need, because it's a project, the goal of the project is to create a feasibility study. You'll identify what you're trying to do, you'll create a team to help do it, your team will come up with some rules, you'll plan what the feasibility study will look like and how you're going to get it done, you'll put it into a schedule, you'll put resources around it, you'll risk manage, you'll create a plan, and then you will create the feasibility study, and then you will close out and say, here it is. And you just went through project management to do investigation only. So you don't want to connect this with that.
I see.
Does that make some more sense?
Well, you just made a nice connection.
And so then you would do that again in design. When
Okay.
it's time to design, you gather the information. This, by the way, is when you talk to the executive. You gather the information, you create a design team, you identify your rules, you identify the scope, you identify the schedule, the resources, you risk manage, you finalize the plan, you get it approved, which means you get budget to build the design of the prototype. You build the prototype and you turn it over. And that is the delivery of a prototype. You just went through this process to do the second phase of the life cycle.
Okay.
So in that picture up there, what I put up there, you will have gone through that process 4 times.
I see.
Now that's where people start saying, "Oh, it's too burdensome." No, I can go through that in a day. I can do. Think of it logically. I'm going to identify what I'm going to do. I'm going to get the right team together. I'm going to identify scope, schedule, resources. I'm going to risk management. I'm going to build it.
Yeah.
Well, that's just my process. That's how I build things.
Right.
Whether it's a little thing or a big thing.
Yeah.
See, you could do all of this in a single project. If it's something that an organization has done 1,000 times and it's time to do it again, and you know what the end looks like, you can do all of that in one single pass through that process. One of the things I tell project managers: never detail plan past your next point of knowledge. When you're working on something you've never done before, you have no idea what this looks like.
Right.
So all you know is this: detail plan that, and that's your project. And then at this point, decide how much more you know, and then plan the next phase of what you know. And the project management process is not the same as the life cycle. The project management process facilitates whatever the life cycle is trying to produce.
So do you call this whole thing as a life cycle?
This is a life cycle.
Okay.
This is a software development life cycle.
Okay.
A hardware development life cycle has different phases.
Sure.
ADDIE has different phases.
I see. Okay.
Process development project. Organizational behavior is where I really am. That's where my real life is.
Yeah.
And so we do a lot of process work. It has a different set of phases, but it's still a life cycle.
Okay.
Movie production.
Okay.
Has a lot of different phases, but I use the exact same project management process in movie development as I do in developing software or developing.
How do you do it in movie development?
What's the phase?
Yeah.
Oh, they start with, see if I can remember, concept. They start with concept. They go to.
So in this case, the concept will be one project, because
because they don't know what it's going to look like at the end.
Well, however, you have a definite beginning and definite end.
Yeah, they know they have to have the concept done by February. If they're going to get the whole thing done by the end of the year, the concept better be done by February.
Right. So just like in a movie, sometimes the investigation process, and then you have design, and then when you get to the deployment, parts of the life cycle, sometimes it may come back. you know, and says,
absolutely.
and go back to the design and says, hey, you have to redo this part, and that becomes a little project, or that becomes a modify.
It's if we look at the project management process, when we get into execution, there's different things we do in execution. One of them is to manage the scope of the project. And the example you just gave is we get in the middle of the project and we discover, oh, that doesn't work.
Right.
That concept was way off.
Right.
Then we go back to this end. We reconcept, we reconstruct the scope, the schedule, and the resources, and we go back through the process to see what the effect of that change is, and then validate with the management, with the portfolio team, whether or not they can afford to change. And in moving production, that's important because oftentimes what they discover here is too expensive and it doesn't get approved here.
Yeah.
So though it's a really cool idea to change it, not enough money to make the change.
Right.
And but that happens in software all the time. We get this far and the customer says, "Oh, I forgot, I needed to do this too." And suddenly it becomes too expensive.
Right.
And so they have to do it without it.
Right.
And that's okay because the important thing is that they have to stay fact-based. There is one of the concepts most important in my mind in all of this problem-solving conversation. We must be fact-based. You must follow a process that gathers facts. And the project manager, the person who's managing this, has to be a fact-based person. If they're managing by emotion, they don't have the facts. So they should step back, gather the facts, come back into the conversation.
Data driven, you're right, and the way of saying it is data driven.
Yes.
Absolutely. Okay.
And so, what I'm trying to say is that in the conversation you and I had from the start, these two were becoming synonymous, and I'm trying to point out to you that they are not synonymous. This is supportive of getting that done.
Right.
Project management is not ADDIE, and ADDIE is not project management.
I see.
Now let me draw a couple more arrows here. There's one that goes this way, directly from product management to development lifecycle. This is organizationally cumbersome. It takes time for an organization to review and decide. So oftentimes a product manager will have given to them an enhancement budget where they can just decide to change it from green to red or to do some GUI change or something. And they can put that inside. This is an enhancement across here. They don't have to go through this formal process to do an enhancement. This is if it's bigger than, and an organization needs to define the difference between the two. So for example, one of the jobs of this process is to define what a project is. Here at BYU, when I first came 13 years ago, they didn't have that definition, so everything was a project. And so when they asked me to put together the project budget for the coming year, I got 435 proposals of projects. And so I asked them, well, how many projects did you get done last year? 30. And you want me to cram 435 projects into 30? Tell me how that works. Well, they didn't have a definition of project. So we decided, finally, after discussion, that a project was anything that was going to require 80 engineering hours. If it required 80 engineering hours, it went through this process. If it was less than 80 hours, it went through this. And the budget was divided between the two. The product manager got this budget, the project office got this budget. And now it's been lowered. They like the exposure that comes from project management, so they've lowered it to 40 hours.
I see. Now, so in terms of the enhancements, if you go back to that earlier definition of a project, it can be a project. It was a beginning. So use that system, but for the organizational structure, you just okay.
And then the organization has to be wise enough to see how many things, because some people start playing the game and saying, well, listen, I've got this really big thing. I'm just going to break it down into 14 small things and do 14 small things. When you start seeing that happen, this organization has to say, wait, no. We see what you're doing. Consolidate that and bring it to us because you're spending our money.
Okay.
So there's the wisdom practiced in this. Okay. As projects go on, they deliver things. That's the purpose of a project, is to deliver something.
Right.
When they deliver it to operations, basically. That's typically every well-developed life cycle has something about operations at the end here.
Sure.
Keeping the thing running the way it was built.
Right.
And selling it.
Right.
And all that stuff.
Right.
So that goes to operations and customer support.
I thought that arrow would be coming from the development life
Well,
cycles.
there is that relationship too, but in the court, and then this extends over here, you must have customer representation in your project management process. Must. So these two, this process, project management, facilitates the development life cycle, but project management creates the deliverable. Development life cycle determines the deliverable. It dictates the deliverable. Because typically in a development life cycle, there is some deliverable attached to the end of each phase. And so depending on the type of project it is, I'm the project manager. My job is to figure out which life cycle we're going to facilitate. And that tells me deliverables of the project. And then my job is to deliver those to operations.
Okay.
But if it's an enhancement, their job is to deliver to operations. But the other part of this arrow right here is a break fix. If these guys discover that something is broken, they can go this way and get it fixed here. Or they can go, I'm going to have to erase here for a second. They can go back this way. If it's a big break, they go back into product management and say, this is really broken, this isn't working. And these guys have to consume that information and propose a new project to fix it.
Sure.
And then the fixed product comes in, the old product goes away, the new one comes in.
Kind of like the Apple map, right? They deliver, the mapping system by Apple, it didn't work, and so it didn't work big time, and so
it went through that.
It went through that.
This model is followed very carefully at Apple. They came back here. It went to the executive team. They compared what they're doing, and you remember it hit the news. They were debating whether they should even be doing. Remember what they did? They bought it from somebody else. That was the decision made here. Implemented, and new product. Old gone, new product in. There's another important arrow that comes here. That's the help desk.
Okay.
This is you calling in and saying it's not working.
I see. Okay.
The customer calls and says it's not working. Now the important thing in that relationship is operations does not own the product. Operation owns the responsibility of keeping the product running the way it was built and designed. Product management owns the product. And so they get information from the customer, they share that information back with product management. Product management gathers that information and determines if they need to make any changes. Maybe it's an enhancement, maybe it's a new product. Either way, it eventually gets back to these guys.
I see.
These guys monitor performance. These guys own performance.
I see. Very good.
And so the distinction, all of this is contributing to problem solving. It doesn't just go in a single one.
And this process that you have identified for me, is this an established process that every project manager understand in all, any IT organization?
No, the interesting thing is that when I get asked to come into an organization because their project management isn't working, which is almost always why they call me, I'll go in and talk to the CIO first, for example, and we'll have this conversation. And he'll stop, and in the course of the conversation, he'll stop and say, well, then wait a minute, it's not my project management that's broken. I'm not doing product management. And so, of course, my project management isn't working. And we end up working on product management before we ever touch their project management process. Because what's coming to project management, the right note at the wrong time. So we end up I usually end up working in those first 3 boxes before I ever touch their project management stuff. Even though they thought project management was. And the reason for that, you see, even 13 years ago when I came here, we were talking IT organizations into doing project management. They didn't want to do it. Now it's just the behavior. Everyone does project management. So in 13 years, it's changed its philosophy. And now it's become a matter of attention. So now if something goes wrong, it's their fault. Wrong. Here's another example. Just had a conversation with an organization last week. They built a system. They enhanced PeopleSoft for the purpose of their goal was to reduce the cost of operations by 10%. That was their goal. And so they did a good job. They did the business strategy, business got together, They gathered requirements. They went to all the people in the organization and said, how are you using PeopleSoft? Let's look at it. Let's see what you're doing. The users were the customer. And they did a great job. Product management did a great job of that research. Great job of that research. And they wrote a project that said, the project objective statement said, reduce cost of operations by 10% by such and such a date for so much money. That was a bad statement.
Yeah.
What they should have said was...
That should be an outcome of service,
exactly. And
strategy.
That statement, the why you're doing it is not the project proposal.
Yeah.
The purpose of it was to reduce cost by 10%. No.
Right.
The real project was enhance the PeopleSoft such and such module by such and such a date for such and such money. That was the project. Why they're doing it wasn't the project manager's job.
Yeah.
Now, he needs to understand why.
Right.
Absolutely. I'm not saying you're oblivious to it.
Right.
Because you're always watching to see. But the project manager doesn't know that. So what had happened is they did something. The project manager became responsible for figuring out how to do it, which wasn't right. And they passed it off to operations, and a year later, the cost of operations had increased. And they blamed the project manager.
Yeah.
And they were a little disconcerted in the beginning of our conversation. After this conversation, I said, that you can't blame the project manager. Product manager abdicated big time.
Yeah.
By passing it off to the project manager. The product manager owns the reduction of cost by 10%. The project manager owns the building of the solution that the product manager has determined is going to reduce cost by 10%.
Yeah.
So, and then when the project is over, the project manager hands it off to operations and goes off to their next project.
Right.
A year later, they find out whether or not it reduced 10%. Well, the project manager's not involved anymore. That's the product manager who should have been monitoring and watching it. Project manager, he was off building other stuff.
Right.
It wasn't his responsibility.
Right.
And
So
it was
in
the
this
abdication of that role that caused
in
the
this
problem.
case, the product is the strategy or whatever tools that they need to use, a certain way of using PeopleSoft. But the product management has never built it. They just say, they told them, they basically want the project management to also be the product management, to come up with
abdication.
Okay.
Gave away their role.
Right.
For blaming purposes.
I see.
Now the second problem arose in that they made the PeopleSoft engineering team manager the project manager. And that is a mistake.
That's a big mistake.
What we've learned over the years is that the technical expert is not the best project manager.
Yeah.
The project manager needs to be able to see a lot more than the technology.
That's right.
And when you make the technical expert the project manager, they see this much.
Right.
And they kind of don't see what's outside of there.
Yeah.
And so we proved this at Intel, in our R&D department. Don't make the technical manager.
It seems to me that what they should have done in this case is that they not only have some technical specification about the product, how it is used technologically, but they should also have some some guidelines on how the product should be used.
Absolutely.
When you should go to PeopleSoft, when you should do queries, when you should not be doing PeopleSoft or doing some other process.
The interesting thing is they had done that. The product manager, up to a point, had done a marvelous job. Requirements documents were fabulous. They had stories. They had test cases all built and everything. But they didn't say what the solution was. They said, here's all of our requirements. And they handed their requirements to the project manager and said, you determine what the solution is. And what they should have done is they should have retained it in product management, have the product management
come up with some solutions.
Come up with what we're going to do to PeopleSoft to fix it, and test it on the, find out if these guys are okay with that, and find out if portfolio management could approve it and afford it, which was the other problem. They were like 250% of budget. Before it ever got to a project manager. They just passed.
So in that correct way, then when they pass to project management, the role of the project management should have been really, they come up with these solutions, but really developing those solutions and implementing them to see if they work or not.
And where that would have really worked for them, and what we're working on with them right now, actually, is if you look in the planning process, look at the planning process, in the scope planning section, you create a definition document first. This is your scope document. And then after you've understood the scope, you've identified not how you're going to do it, but what you need to do. Then the next step is to determine the planning and management approach. This is saying we now understand what we have to build. What's the best approach to do that? And they didn't do this. They did this as a single project, when in fact what they should have done is break it up into 4 different projects. One for integration, one for building, one for hardware. They had a hardware piece they completely ignored, and one for administration. They should have had 4 projects. And they should have made that decision here, which becomes a program. This is also the step in which you decide whether you're going to do the agile approach or not. This you know enough now to decide what's the best way to get this done. And then you talk to your management, you talk to your sponsor and make sure they agree with you. And then you do a work breakdown structure. And they started with the work break. They didn't do any of this stuff and started with the work breakdown structure as one single project. And had a whole bunch of tasks that didn't make any sense and did not collaborate well together. Because they look how far into project management. They did none of this stuff. They started right there.
Yeah. So this scope part, this is what you would call the
these are the tasks.
The tasks.
Up until now, you've done verbs and adjectives, or no, you've done nouns and adjectives. Now you start adding verbs to it.
Okay.
There, but not until management has agreed to your solution. And too many projects start there. The first thing they do is bring a team together and say, "What do we have to build? What do we have to do?" And they start putting tasks up on the wall, and they haven't even come together on what they're building. And they find themselves in trouble. And that's why that was another reason they were in trouble. And a very common problem.
Right.
Very, very common.
Right. Well,
does this make any sense?
This is very helpful.
One of the things I've learned and what you're seeing here is that in organizational behavior, big problems get solved by breaking them into small pieces. And so this big problem of getting projects done on time ends up being broken down into smaller pieces so you can identify the source of the issue, and then you know the kind of solution. Because the solution to broken project management is different than the solution to broken product management.
Absolutely. Well, you have given me a lot to digest. You know, it actually, I mean, I have talked to several people about this project, but none of them have changed the way that I think about my project that you have, and this is good. You know, this is good that we do that. I have started this project, you know, thinking that, okay, well, maybe, you know, there's really a universal problem-solving model that we can use in any type of problems, because we always, you know, it seems like, you know, we always need to have some type of analysis and then some type of planning or design, and then you develop, you know, the solution and implement it.
You know, but you can go back into all the development life cycles, no matter how many there are, and you will find common elements if they're well built. And the bad ones, you want to throw those out. But good ones that are well built, you'll always find some kind of investigation. You'll always find some kind of design.
Right.
You'll always find some kind of build, and most often a test. Not always, but most often a test. And you'll always find some kind of deployment. Now, the words will be different, the names of those phases will be different, but you'll always find those common elements. And the one that I'm encouraging being added to the commonality of that investigation, whatever that might be, its concept in movie building, for example. The investigation is whether or not it can and should be done. The design is, well, I always go to the scriptures on this one. It's building it spiritually before it's built physically. That's design. And even the gods had to do that. We learned that so profoundly in the temple. That even the most knowledgeable of all that we know of had to go through a design before they did a build. And so that design becomes an important part. And then the build becomes an important part. But then I'm encouraging organizations to think strongly about the validation as the next phase. Meaning, don't just build it and test it yourself. After you have built it and tested internally, validate with your customer to be sure it's meeting their needs before you deploy it. And the customer should not be the tester. If I'm the customer of something you're building, I should never see a system error. I should never see things that the infrastructure doesn't work. You should have seen those and fixed those long before you ever sent it to me.
Right.
The customer should never be the tester. Because the first time I get a system error, I lose confidence in you.
Yeah.
And
That's
it's
right.
not to your advantage. So you take that extra minute. That's why you saw me put up here build and test together in a single phase. Because that's build and test yourself. Then when you see it work the way you think it's supposed to work, give it to the customer to see if it meets their need. And that's the validation. And I'm seeing a weakness in customer validation in the development life cycle that I get to review.
You call it validation. Are you making a distinction between validation and beta testing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what's the difference?
The beta testing is an internal piece.
Beta is internal?
Yeah.
We usually alpha. We say alpha is internal.
Alpha is the first phase. Alpha is me, the builder, doing it myself. Beta is the person next to me looking at it to see if it worked the same for him as it did for me.
Oh.
Then the next level is customer validation.
Okay.
So look at it technically yourself, look at it technically by somebody else. If it's working good here, then give it to the customer. And the customer should not be testing the technology, they should be testing the use.
Yeah. Well, sometimes we call it a little differently, mainly because we see so many beta products out there that are for customers. Like Gmail, for a long time it was a beta. They always say Gmail is beta, and but customers were using it and giving them feedback.
It would be cautious not to use Microsoft or companies like Microsoft as your example. Microsoft uses the customer as the beta tester.
Right.
And they do it on purpose.
Right.
And we always know, I always know, don't buy the first version that comes out of Microsoft. Don't buy the second version. Wait for the third iteration because you're testing it. You're free testing to them.
Yeah.
And they don't care if you find mistakes. And they know you're still going to buy it.
Yeah.
You already did.
Right.
And so they get free testing.
Yeah.
Apple does not do that. Apple doesn't put it out until they're sure it works. And that's why they get such a big deal about this bending of the phones, for example. Well, they weren't bending. I mean, it was not a horrible thing, but it's the worst thing people could find.
Yeah.
Of a very tested system.
Yeah.
The testing at Apple is an incredibly mature procedure.
Right.
And it never hits the marketplace until they're sure.
Yeah.
And they even get shocked and upset about things like the bending of the 6S because how could we not have seen that? And I actually saw one of the emails that went back and forth between a couple of the teams on that.
Oh, really?
Because some of my students were on that team. And
the management was very
finger pointing in that organization is horrible.
Wow.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's horrible.
Yeah.
So they just make sure nothing, but Microsoft isn't that way.
Yeah.
Microsoft is very fine putting something out that doesn't work.
Right.
Which takes you to another piece that's really important in what you're talking about. It belongs up here in this business strategy. I'll draw it down here. Part of business strategy is business culture.
Yeah.
Word that gets thrown around a lot. In fact, we just found out yesterday that Webster, every year they put out the top 10 words of the year. Culture was the #1 word of the year this year.
Oh.
Isn't that interesting? This culture model is presented for the purpose of decision making in an organization.
Okay.
So that everybody inside the organization would hopefully make decisions that would be beneficial to the organization and not disrupt the organization. And there are 4 different, they all start with the letter C. There's a collaboration organization, a control organization, a competence organization, and cultivation.
All C's.
Yeah, that's done for alliteration purposes.
Right.
This is customer based. This is process based. This is quality based or product based. If I don't put both words up there. And this is employee based. And the concept is this. Well, we talked about Apple. Apple is very much a competence organization.
Yeah.
They make decisions based on the quality and the product.
Right.
A competence organization tells the customer what they want.
Yeah.
And makes you want it.
Right.
And that's Apple all over
Right,
the place.
right.
They don't get input from you, by the way.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah.
They don't care.
Right.
They know you're going to like it. If they
Right.
build it, they'll come.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, you're dumb.
Yeah.
That's a competence organization, and it works. It makes
Yeah.
lots of money for them.
Yeah.
But notice that when they changed leaders, when Steve Jobs died and a new leader came in, he had that same philosophy exactly.
Yeah.
Because they decided that's the way this company will run. So they just replaced Steve Jobs with another Steve Jobs.
Right. Really.
That's not happening at Microsoft.
Right. No.
Microsoft,
Yeah.
when they changed their leader, they actually changed their culture. Google just went through this. Collaboration. Let's talk about collaboration. Collaboration is an organization that it's not collaborating just with the customer, but it's lots of collaboration, including the customer, to meet the customer's needs. In a collaboration organization, the customer has a lot of influence, and you will adjust your products to meet the wants of the customer. You want everyone as your customer.
I see.
In a competence organization,
And is Google a collaboration?
actually no. Google started out as a cultivation.
Uh-huh.
Now, Google started out with two partners.
Right.
One was very cultivation, very much, let's make this the best place in the world to work, because that will attract the best people. The other partner was very control. He was about process. He was about making things, the bottom line, being efficient and being successful. That's what that's about. Now, what's important in this model is that horizontally and vertically, these are compatible. Diagonally, there's organizational friction.
I see.
And you can see that between collaboration and
Yeah,
competence.
yeah.
This is Nordstrom. Nordstrom will do everything to keep you as a customer. They have the world's greatest return policy because they want you to come back. They want you to come back and buy more. And so they're going to let you bring back what you didn't like because they know you're going to buy something when you're in the store. That's collaboration. Apple is competence. Those are two very different behaviors. The same with cultivation and control. Cultivation is, let's hire the best people, let's give them an environment that they can flourish in, let them even determine how they're going to work. Let's make it really nice to work here. Control says we have processes in place, and if you work here, you follow these processes. Well, cultivation people don't like to follow process.
Yeah.
So here we had two partners, a cultivation partner and a control partner. And as they got together and formed Google, they decided that cultivation was going to be their dominant culture. And that's one of the key important points here is that the culture of an organization should have some of all four of those.
Yeah.
If you think about it, you won't be successful if you eliminate
That's right,
those.
absolutely.
But one of them should be dominant. And the others should point towards that. So, for example, here at BYU, our IT department has gone through this exercise, and we've determined that we want to be a collaboration organization. Our CIO said, I want you talking to the users on campus. I want you hearing and when they want something, I want us to figure out how to build it. An IT organization that does that takes more time, spends more money, and has to be prepared to meet the needs of the customer. So we decided we were a collaboration. My job is process inside that organization. Well, the processes that I build have to point towards collaboration. They have to be collaborative processes. If we were a competence organization, my processes would look a little bit different because they'd all be about quality. I would be putting in more Six Sigma and those total quality management kinds of things. But in a collaboration organization, we have competence, but we demand it only to a certain level, and then we let the customer decide how much further they want to go with their quality.
I see.
You see what I'm saying? Because it's the subdominant behavior.
That's right.
So they decided that cultivation was going to be their dominant, but they need to have enough process to have cultivation be successful, to make money. Obviously. Well, and so have you ever been to the Google?
No, but I have watched documentaries, of it.
Such an experience.
Yeah, it's very fun and all you can eat.
They want you to want to be there 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
That's what they do. And one of my favorite things there is they have a concierge service. If I'm sitting at my desk and think, oh my gosh, I was supposed to pick up my pills, you call concierge and they'll send somebody out to pick up your pills and bring them to you.
Is that right?
If you're running late in a meeting and you can't go pick up your kid at school, the concierge will go out and pick up your kid at school.
Yeah.
And not charge you.
I
It's
see.
just a service.
I see.
That's very cultivation oriented.
Right.
Now what happened? 2 years ago, this coming January, almost 2 years ago, they changed leadership, if you recall.
Yeah.
The cultivation CEO, the control guy was the co-CEO. They swapped them. And this guy became the CEO, and the cultivation became the co-CEO. and they have implemented some processes that they didn't have before because they were finding out that they weren't being as financially successful as they could afford to maintain. And so they instead of just saying we're going to just beef up our processes, they said no, we're actually going to change what we're doing. We're going to move process up and make it our dominant now. We've gotten good at cultivation. We don't want to lose too much of it, but we need more control.
Yeah.
And in fact, control needs to tell some of you how to do your jobs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So by the way, some of you who have been working from home all the time, you need to come into the office at least one day a week.
Right.
Simple things like that.
Sure.
And they lost many employees.
Sure. Well, Yahoo tried to do that too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there are lots that are doing that.
Yeah.
But that's how. But the leadership has to determine what that looks like. And you can see that depending on what your dominant culture is, will depend on how you manage these processes.
Yeah.
And that's why that arrow from business strategy down into portfolio management and down into product management and over to customer is very important, because that decision making has to happen throughout the organization. This becomes a real driving behavior, and oftentimes with executive teams, I'll spend time on this before I ever talk about any of that.
And they would tell you, what their culture is.
Well, I will coach them through letting me know what they think their culture is. And what I learn oftentimes is that the members of the leadership team have a different picture in mind than the leader himself. Because it hasn't been well communicated. And so part of the problem of the organization is that even the leadership team isn't culturally aligned. And so you have some out there saying control is it. You have others out there saying quality is it. And in the meantime, the CEO is saying, well, no, I want to be collaborative. We'll listen to the customer. And they haven't built any customer collaboration processes. Nobody knew that was in his head.
I see.
It becomes very important to resolve that.
Great.
Part of my research around that was around the .coms, because I was in Palo Alto. I was at Stanford before I came to BYU.
I see.
Was around this and the .coms. And what we finalized, I had some people from Berkeley and from Duke on my team. What we finalized is that the reason the .com bomb happened was because most of them formed themselves around this culture. They were so tired of the big box companies that they just wanted to rent a room with just bare walls and bring your dog and bring your bike and fly your kites and come naked and do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. Just come and enjoy yourself at work, and we think out of that will come great things. And they did not have these.
Sure.
And I'm not saying you have to have a lot of these, but you got to have some. You got to know who your customer is. You got to have some process, and you got to have some level of quality, or this won't matter.
That's right.
And the bomb came because they stayed here. They didn't know their customer. They didn't even know their product, and they absolutely refused process. Absolutely abhorred process. And they bombed.
That's right.
You have to have some of all four.
Well, you see that in education too. Some educational series very student oriented, which is the right thing, but sometimes if you just say, okay, well, what would you like to learn today, well, how would you like this course to be, you tell me, and they want, well, it doesn't always work that way, it may work with some in a doctorate seminar, when students have already done the basic work. But if this is an introductory class and you try to go in there and say, okay, what would you like to learn? Well, it doesn't work that way.
I had a very interesting experience here 13 years ago when I came to BYU. I came in July of 2001. And in August, during our budgeting process, I was with the President's Council, President Bateman at the time, and his vice presidents. We had that conversation because I couldn't, I was trying to build a portfolio process so we could figure out how to prioritize the work here on the university. Well, I had to understand this because the portfolio process, for example, if you're a competence dominant organization, the strategic intent of the organization is going to be voiced differently. And the decisions you make about which projects you work on will be around quality. But I couldn't quite divine what it was here. And so I went to the President's Council and did an extended version of this and said, I need to understand where you guys are on this. And they ended up deciding that they were a competence-driven organization. And when that's the answer, then the first question you ask is, then what's your product? And you know what their answer was?
Well, I think BYU has always been about developing church leaders.
Their product was the student.
Yeah.
And I had a bit of a reaction to that. In fact, I'd only been there a month. You think I
Yeah,
would have been a
yeah.
little more diplomatic? I said, "Oh no!" Just like that. I said,
Oh.
"Oh no! I'm a student here at BYU. I am not your product. What I do with what I learn in the classroom after I leave the door is none of your business.
Okay.
The student is not your product. What's in the classroom maybe is your product." But the student is not your product. You can't claim every student that's ever been here and say what they're doing is your fault. I said it just like that, and it was dead silent. And I thought, well, I guess I just lost my job. And finally, the newest member of the President's Council said, well, if that's the case, then our product is the classroom. And the classroom is there for the student. The student is our customer.
Customers. That absolutely.
And the light bulb just went on.
Yeah.
And President Bateman stood up and said, I can't believe we haven't thought of that before.
Yeah.
And then we started having conversations around how to treat the student as a customer.
Yeah.
And not as a product.
Yeah. They're definitely.
And you've seen change at the university. You've seen change in technology. You've seen change in how IT supports the classroom. Lots of changes on campus have happened because the President's Council said, oh, no, we're not this.
Yeah.
We're that.
Yeah.
And they changed their behavior. And that was good leadership.
Yeah.
And they have stayed with that. And
So they changed from competence to collaboration.
And changed their behavior as a result of it.
Yeah.
And actually changed, I want to be careful I say this, but there was a hierarchy of influence on the President's Council 13 years ago. And the competence people were highest in hierarchy. And immediately it shifted. And those that were helping the students.
What would be like the competence people in a university?
The academic vice president.
Uh-huh.
He was the most influential person on the President's Council.
I thought still is. Yeah.
In fact, you notice when we got our new president,
Uh-huh.
it wasn't the academic.
Yeah, that's right. Is the enrichment. The advancement. Right. Yeah, advancements is all about
bringing them in and giving them a good experience.
Right.
Now, what's interesting, we're going to go deep into this conversation now.
Yeah.
BYU is a subset of the LDS Church.
Yeah.
We're a sub-organization of the LDS
Right.
Church. The LDS Church is a competence-driven organization, big time. You can't choose which values, which rules you're going to follow. They set the rules, you follow them. You don't follow them, you're not a member.
Right.
They get it.
Yeah.
That's competence.
Yeah.
Can BYU be successful in a competence-driven organization? Absolutely. Because remember that a good organization needs to have some of all four of them.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we rely on our sub-organizations to mature the subdominant cultures. And so BYU is actually a part of the collaboration subdominance of the church. We contribute to the collaboration portion of the church's behavior and help to balance it out a little bit and fine-tune it a little bit.
Sure.
But we do not steal from the competence. And in fact, we are dominated by their competence.
Right.
You have to honor the honor code.
Sure. Well, another example is the Polynesian Cultural Center, in Hawaii. You know the Polynesian. Yeah. I mean, it's very.
I just got back from teaching it a week ago.
Yeah. I mean, it's very customer based. Yeah.
Very.
And in fact, it is so customer based that it bans some of the rules. Like they serve coffees,
Absolutely.
in the business, and they have a smoking area within the facility.
They had to go through to get permission.
Right.
But they got it.
Right. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
So yeah.
So as insignificant as that may seem, maybe that is a very important concept up inside of that business strategy. Because if you understand what your business culture is and you inculcate that into the conversation of the organization, then the decisions that you make about which projects you work on are influenced by your culture, which means that what's being implemented is actually culturally sound, which means it can be operational because it's part of the culture. But if that piece is missing, then then product management starts driving the culture, and the culture gets built bottom up, and that is not a good behavior. Culture is a top-down behavior when it comes to business decisions. It's a top-down behavior.
No.
Even when if you're cultivation-oriented and you let the people decide, your culture is let the people decide. So you're still top-down. The top has said, let the bottom rule.
Sure.
So this top is still ruled.
No. I came here because I thought I'm trying to find some common principles that are universal in all problem-solving situations. Are you telling me that there's no such thing? Or are there some common principles that you have seen over and over again in any type of problem-solving situations?
But there are principles,
And,
not necessarily practices.
Right. And what are these principles?
In no particular order, I'll just say it as it comes to mind.
Sure, yeah.
Participation of two factions. Oftentimes, we get the people to participate that are going to do the work, to implement, to build and create the solution or to solve the problem. But the first question that should be asked is who's most affected by this?
The
and then stakeholders are both.
Yeah.
Who's most affected and who will most contribute. And we spend so much time on who will contribute that we sometimes forget to involve those who are most affected. And that should be the first question we ask.
Sure.
Who is most affected? And then who will most contribute? And both of those together become stakeholders. And stakeholder management becomes one of the key principles. But you must identify the whole stakeholder base. That's been a common value that I think has been overlooked a little bit and caused a problem. The second then is communication. Once you know your stakeholders, then communication with management of the stakeholders, making sure that they're aware of what's going on, becomes an important overarching principle of good problem solving. Not picking and choosing, but making sure that your stakeholders are attended to and that your communication is well done. And so one of the ways to do that is when you have a problem-solving team